Und so wird man in Deutschland beliebt. What's going on, everybody? This is the Coverbandconfidential podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and suck less. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, freshly sprung from COVID isolation, Dan Ray.
Yeah, so this is the second attempt at this episode because our friend was in lockdown. He was in his fortress of solitude, which had a lot of background noise, and it just was there was not much we could do to fix it. So
didn't work well.
We'll just we'll hit this on a Thursday morning. We'll crank it out, and it'll be in your earballs by 10 o'clock tonight, hopefully.
Yeah. Plus, the topic, as you'll see, is a little off the normal beaten track, and we didn't really have a through line when we did it. So I'm actually happy for a second cut at this conversation.
Yeah. Second time's a charm for sure.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are confused as to why I started the show in a different language, that is for our friends in Germany who we were the number 31 music podcast in Germany last week. So wanted to give a shout out to all of our German listeners. Dankeschön and Bratwurst to you guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though most of them speak better English than we do.
Yeah, that's true. My favorite German word, Krankenhaus. Hospital. Which Krankenhaus. Yes. And an ambulance is a Krankenwagen.
Good times.
These are good words.
How are you feeling?
I'm better. I went to a work conference last week and came home with the vid. Just, a couple of days, and I was testing negative. I guess the new vaccines must really help you knock it out quick because it was a much quicker deal than the last time. So, worse symptoms, not terrible, but like a heavy cold. But it did not linger, and I'm clean bill of health, back among the living. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah,
it was a nice reminder to get that scheduled because we've got a bunch of stuff coming up, and I'd hate to miss it.
Right.
Because of being sick.
Right.
Because I know you had to cancel your Sunday show, didn't you?
I did. We had to cancel a gig, and it was sad. So
it's never fun, but it's the right thing to do.
Yes, right thing to do.
Onwards and upwards.
Yeah.
Let's see. This week has been pretty eventful. I got to see my favorite band of all time reunite for the first time in 22 years.
It's awesome.
I was talking with actually John Pradis, who's one of our patrons out of New Orleans, who flew up to see the show. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to meet up with him because getting downtown where the venue is, it was at a place called the Tabernacle in Atlanta. If you've never been, it is one of the most incredible places to see a live show. It's this old church from like the turn of the century. It lasts like the century before.
A century ago, yeah.
Yeah, incredible place to see it. And so I went and saw the Marvelous Three, which is Butch Walker's band from back in the 90s. And they were just like an Atlanta staple and are honestly the reason why I play music at all. Seeing those guys in 1999 completely changed the trajectory of my life, which is not an exaggeration because here I am, 30 some odd years later, I'm still doing it. Yeah. So it clearly had an impact. Got to take Amber and our oldest and saw all of my friends. And I was talking with Jonathan. Sorry, I looped back around. We were talking about it and it was like, this is probably the closest I am ever going to get to the feeling that Swifties going to Taylor Swift's shows feel like.
Yeah.
Because you're just around it's just a community of people who all think and kind of feel things the same way that you do. And there's this shorthand and you're kind of in on this thing that not everybody fully understands. So it was, I would say, one of the greatest concerts I've ever seen. It was a band that's been not active. They had a fully modern show with LED walls and light programming, and it was just phenomenal.
Cool.
I cried so much.
Awesome.
In all the good ways.
Yeah, it's great.
It's nice to know that music can still move you after all these years.
You're not a jaded
husk. It's easy for us to be cynical.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, sometimes you're seeing things like, is it going to bug me? Because I'm sure they're running clicks now, and are those lyrics canned, like the background vocals? Don't care. I was 18 again for 2 whole hours.
Nice.
And that was worth it all. Other than that, been advancing a holiday party that is kind of strange, and I don't quite have all the information with it together, but it looks like it's going to happen. It's going to get a contract out this week, and the venue's I could walk there from my house, so that's kind of nice. And I got a chance to talk with the owners of the venue, which happens to be a restaurant that I really love, and it's always nice to have friends in places like that. So more ups than downs, but we'll talk about it. Don't worry about it right now. And then we had band practice last night. And we're prepping for 80s Ladies Night at 37 Avondale next Saturday, 11/11. And things are moving there. We added 2 new songs we've never done before, which is She Bop by Cyndi Lauper.
Nice.
And I Hate Myself for Loving You by Joan Jett, which is just, if you just put it in your list.
Yeah, both of those are just bangers.
It's dead easy, and it rips. just do it. And yeah, I feel like we're all caught up now.
Cool.
So let's go into reviews. Now, here's something I feel like we've kind of missed the boat.
Yeah.
This is definitely an oversight on our part. So, we've been saying, oh, if you want to leave a review, you can just go to Apple, and you poor people over there on Spotify, you just can't participate. Sorry to hear that. Well, it turns out that you've been able to leave comments and ratings on individual episodes on Spotify for like, I don't know, 6 months or so, maybe longer, actually longer than that, because we have one as far back as February of this year. So for once, not for once, but in a while, we actually have a bit of a backlog that we can talk through. So I'm feeling really good about that. So all of you Spotify folks, if you want to leave a kind word, you can do it on the episode while you're listening to it.
Yeah.
It's so much easier. So this one comes from Tonmy, Tonmy. Not sure how you pronounce that. But it says, Adam and Dan are a real treat. I've learned a lot from their podcasts. There is so much to discover as musicians, and the Coverbandconfidential podcast accomplishes just that. Thanks for not sucking. Thank you, Tonmy.
Yeah, it's our privilege to not suck.
Indeed. So, like I said, if you want to leave a review, you can do it on Spotify now. And we'll keep at it. I got a couple more this week from other places. So there'll be lots to talk about in the coming episodes.
Awesome.
All good stuff.
Yep.
Speaking of some housekeeping stuff, I was approached a couple of weeks ago by a pedal company who sent me some stuff and wanted to get my thoughts on it because they thought that maybe their stuff would be beneficial to our listenership and our viewers online. They're a company called Rockstock Pedals, and they make really interesting utility style pedals. They're not necessarily effects or whatever, but they're really handy little doodads. And so they sent me a couple of their wares, and I'm putting them through the ringer, and we'll be definitely talking about them in future episodes and, of course, on the YouTube channel. But they also want to do a giveaway. We haven't quite figured out the logistics of that, but if you want to find out about the specifics on how to win one of those pedals from us, go ahead and follow us on Instagram, which is at Coverbandconfidential, just like everything else. We'll more than likely announce the giveaway and all of the specifics on how to win it over there. So hop on over to Instagram, give us a follow, and stay tuned for more information about that stuff.
Pretty cool.
And of course, thanks to Rockstock Pedals for being kind enough to give us some stuff and share it with you guys.
That's neat that we're starting to have the juice to pull things like that. That's gratifying.
Got a little bit. I've got a couple of companies who've sent some stuff, and we'll continue to share things that we think are worth sharing. And there's been a couple of companies who have kind of dropped the ball, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus just yet, but just know that not all companies run their stuff the same way. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so in the haze of COVID and just Dan's isolation, he came up with an interesting topic.
Well,
and I'll kind of let you kick it off, and we'll kind of put some bumpers around it as we go.
Yeah, there you go. So it actually came from the conference I was at the week before, which was a work conference. As I've said, I think I mentioned this when we were talking to those students in last week's episode, which was super fun, by the way.
Yes. Could we please do that again?
Seriously.
If you're a music industry professor, we would love to speak at your
Totally.
thing. Please let us.
Totally. But, in my day gig, I work in real estate tech. I work for a multiple listing service, biggest one in the country, actually. And this conference I went to was about MLSs and companies that make software that sell into MLSs and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we are attentive to in that community is a thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So this just took a turn toward the obscure. I'm aware. But it's important because that is a still very relevant piece of law that is about preventing companies from monopolistic behavior. It's about preventing a variety of activities that would fall under that. It was the set of laws under which Standard Oil was broken up, the Bell system was broken up, Microsoft, their browser monopoly was broken up underneath the Sherman Antitrust Act. So it's very, even though that was now a couple decades ago, it's still quite relevant to things. And it put limits around what we can talk about, because in theory, every MLS is a competitor with every other, but here we are in a room talking about stuff. And so we can never, ever, ever talk about pricing, for instance, because that would be a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So we're really careful about that. And
right.
So I started thinking, there's this whole other piece of my life where I deal with the matter of pricing and of competition. And I just started thinking about what we can learn about the band market through what that law is meant to be aimed at. So,
right.
One of the things that that law outlaws is the act of price fixing, right? It's just vendors of product colluding together to set and fix a price for their goods. Another one, and I have never heard of bands doing this in a community, but just to head it off, it's an interesting thing to just chat about, is a thing called bid rigging, where, imagine you and the 6 other bands who commonly get hit up for corporate work in your area decide you're going to be clever. Either you can all compete and somebody's going to win every gig at like 3,000, or we can pick who's going to win each one, and everyone bid 12,000, and then the one person who we've selected for this one bids 5. So each gig now gets more expensive, and we pass the work around our community. That is outlawed by the Sherman Antitrust Act. That's actually not a thing you can do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that happening against government contracts around the time the law was made. So that's where that came from.
Man, imagine, but like, as terrible as that sounds, but imagine, like, I always feel like as bands, like, we don't really have that kind of leverage. But imagine if you had that kind of leverage, like, that would be crazy.
For sure. And, it wouldn't be tough to set up the Facebook group to coordinate that. These days we have more power to do that sort of thing than ever. And
this is one of the things where, like, you had said initially, like, this is a bad idea. It's like, well, actually, the problem is that it's a really, really, really good idea.
Absolutely.
It's too good.
Too good. So good it has to be illegal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, the point of all of this is to make sure that the market effects of competition continue working. And mostly competition works in favor of the consumer, right? So if we were to, all the bands in the area get together and say, we're not doing $100 a man gigs anymore, the prevailing rate is 200 now. The bands could all align, if everyone got together and do that. Now, we're of course dealing with musicians, so there'll be a lot of, people who are going to see that and then, if I stay at 100, I can undercut everyone and get every gig. There's a lot of that. But if we were to somehow magically get that kind of alignment happening in the market, we could flex our muscle against every booker and make the price for everything go up. I don't know whether we would actually fall under real legal scrutiny about that. The dollar figures probably just aren't high enough to be attractive to anybody who would care.
Sure.
But in principle, it's the kind of thing that this law would outlaw.
All right. So I feel like we've got a general idea around what the concept is.
Yeah.
So let's zoom out. Let's look at bigger questions and how it could be, I guess, interpreted for our listenership. So antitrust laws, who is it for? Why does something like that need to exist? And who does it protect?
Yeah, ultimately it's about protecting the consumer. It's about protecting individuals who are going to have to, pay more for their beers if the entertainment costs more across the entire market. Ultimately all that money is coming out of end consumers' pockets. And so the big picture here is that it prevents people from having to pay more for the same services solely because some cartel of providers colluded to raise all the prices. That's really ultimately the net of that particular piece of the Sherman Antitrust Act. There's a lot more that isn't relevant, but
but you also kind of brought up a good point, because it can also be used in the opposite way. Let's say we're talking about venue owners and they just decide that every band's only going to make $100 because that's what we're going to agree on.
Yep.
Across all of these venues. So it can also be a way to, I guess, keep money where it goes and not dole it out quite as much.
Right. And I think it's the broader question here is not really whether the law is going to come get us or anything like that. It's not really what I'm talking about. It's just an interesting thought to think about how collective leverage works. It's a thing just sort of to be aware of right now in terms of like bar gig pricing. For sure, the venues have collective leverage because they've all, kind of agreed that we're $100 a head proposition and have been for the last 50 years. But it's also, there's this phenomenon called information asymmetry where one person in a negotiation knows more than the others. And that's one of the things that this collusion kind of activity is meant to work around. Like, I know that the others competing, quote unquote, competing with me for a gig, we're all sort of in cahoots, and the person I'm negotiating with on the other side of the transaction might not know that and might be working in a vacuum in terms of understanding the market leverage I'm bringing to bear.
Okay. In our world, what does that look like? What could pass as that?
Well, I think the example of the market all sort of agreeing that bar gigs are, the price they are is one. I think that if bands got together and sort of banded together to raise prices across the board, that would be a way of using that collective leverage against the bookers, and again, nominally, I think the law would have something to say about that, but I don't think in practice anybody's going to get in real trouble for it.
Yeah, we've talked about it, like, where I feel like I know this got brought up on a past episode, where like a band just getting started would like email another band posing as a client or a potential lead,
right,
to get their pricing,
right,
which is gross, but doesn't quite hit the threshold of illegality. It's just kind of,
it's
not cool.
Kind of scummy. And one of the things that this implies is that while it may be legally questionable under the law that I'm citing here, it certainly is a powerful negotiating place for bands to be transparent with one another about their pricing, right? Because it enables us all to operate in an environment of more information, right? If if we know sort of where our pricing falls, and then of course it would give you the ability to say, well, all right, their pricing is much higher, but they roll with a full light rig. They roll with, they got the horn section, all of that. Like where my product falls, I can now price it commensurate with the product it is compared to other products. I would say that kind of knowledge is generally good for the market, because it would help that pricing and that product design be rationalized across all of the offerings in the market, right? So I think, despite what this law says, I would encourage bands to be talking about this stuff, because I'm on the band side of negotiation and not the booker side, and I want us to win. That's one thing. But I think it's helpful for bookers too, to be able to, you don't have to go hunting for that band who's accidentally half the price of everybody else and doesn't know it. There aren't going to be finding that hidden gem is, I guess, a good thing for them, but isn't it better if you kind of know, better for budgeting, at least, if you can kind of know what the price range is going to be and what you're going to get for that, and it's pretty much level across all of the providers. It seems to me like that's a better place for a booker to work from.
Yeah, and the big question would be, should musicians talk with other musicians about pricing? And I think the answer to that is yes.
Yep.
We've got a couple of closed groups on Facebook of musicians kind of in our world. It's typically a way to trade gigs, but every once in a while someone will be like, hey, I've got this thing coming up, this is what it pays. Or I've got a couple of back channels with other band leaders in my area where it's like, okay, this person reached out to me and they said they reached out to you also. What did you quote them? Because you either, I don't know, from my perspective, I don't adjust my pricing. I like the price point that we're at. I'd like to be a little higher, because of course I would.
Sure.
But I'm also not bashful about what we charge to other musicians. And I know that there's plenty of bands out there that charge much less than we do. And whether they provide a commensurate product is, up for interpretation. But I'm not at all bashful about the fact that, like, hey, this is what we cost. And it can be difficult when setting expectations with people when, like, a client has reached out to another band first and, we come in at, almost double or more what they were initially quoted, but I still feel confident that the product that we offer is worth the price that we charge. So, and it's just a good thing to know if you know that, like, you've got a group in town that charges $1,000 a show, and you can kind of like say, well, we offer a couple of extra things. We have better production or whatever, and we have more people in the band, so maybe we can charge more than that. I don't think there's any problem with that.
No.
And it's still always a conversation around knowing what you're worth and pricing accordingly. But more information is always going to be better, because, I mean, there's all of this stuff where they tell it's companies kind of frown upon you talking with other coworkers about how much you make.
But you should anyway. That's not illegal.
You should anyway.
Yeah.
And the same goes for gigs around town. If you play a standing gig every week and they're paying you $200 and somebody comes up to you, just tell them. There's no point in being precious about it. I mean, you can be, and you can look at every other musician as competition, but we've just chosen not to do that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I feel like our market has benefited, and pricing is where it's at, and we don't have any problems commanding that price. So.
Right. So go boldly, violate the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, and
yes,
that's kind of the takeaway.
To quote myself from late last week, screw the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Yeah, in this context anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, just clip this and use it whenever you guys feel like canceling me.
That's right. When you decide to run for governor, that one will come back and haunt you.
That's definitely on my horizon for sure.
Yeah.
Any other parting thoughts, words, acknowledgments, affirmations?
Just rah us.
Yeah.
So that's, general purpose affirmation.
Good stuff. So for those of you checking this out, what does your scene kind of look like? Do you discuss pricing with other bands? Like what is the conversation like in your area? Let us know. Coverbandconfidential@gmail.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment. Every kind of marketplace is going to be different, but the more you know about just the way that this kind of business operates in general, the better off you're going to be, the easier it'll be to kind of navigate new opportunities and that kind of thing. So it's all about sharing information. That's what we're here for. It's literally the premise of this entire show. So hit us up, let us know. And I think that'll do it for this week.
Yep.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one. If you want to support the show, you can do all the stuff that Mike's about to tell you about. But we'll go ahead and call it for this week. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
You have been listening to the Coverband Confidential podcast for the week of November 3rd, 2023.